We're ready, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for this, the Monday, March 13th monthly work session of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. This work session is being held at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Government Center at 600 East 4th Street in room 267. For viewing by the public and media, today's meeting is being streamed live on the Planning, Design, and Development Department's YouTube page. This meeting is officially called to order. We will begin with introductions. My name is Kiba Samuel, and I serve as Chair of the Planning Commission.
Philip Gusman, Vice Chair.
Rebecca Wilden, Planning Commission.
Rick Winiker, Planning Commission.
Shauna Neely, Planning Commission.
Douglas Welton, Planning Commission.
Terry Lansdale, Planning Commission.
Clayton Seeley, Planning Commission.
Courtney Rhodes, Planning Commission.
Will Russell, Planning Commission.
Andrew Blumenthal, Planning Commission.
And staff, please.
Candace Rory, Planning Staff.
Allison Craig, Interim Planning Director.
Siobhan Davis, Planning Staff.
Alicia Osborne, Planning Staff. Catherine Mahoney, Planning Staff.
We also have some staff, support staff in the audience with us. We will hear from them a little bit later, I believe, but I would like to acknowledge that we have a guest in our audience. As soon as I turn on the microphone, I would like to acknowledge, please, our guest that is in the audience with us today. Commissioner Elaine Powell has joined us. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy day to sit with us. Ms. Commissioner Powell is the Vice Chair of the Board of County Commissioners for Mecklenburg County, and she also chairs the Environmental Stewardship Committee of the Board of County Commission. We're happy to have her here with us today. We will have, actually, when I attend BOCC committee meetings, I am often afforded a seat at the dais. Not that you have to, but you are certainly welcome to join us at the dais if you would like and if you're comfortable. So I would just like to extend that invitation to Commissioner Powell. We will now go through our, this is March, so we're going to view our February meeting minutes. And if everyone has had a chance to review, can I have a motion to propose any edits or a motion to approve?
Lansdale, motion to approve.
Second, Blumenthal.
Motion by Lansdale, second by Blumenthal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Thank you all. A couple of months ago, I attended a council function and Charlotte Fire Chief Johnson presented some information at this particular meeting. And although I cannot recall the occasion, I remember being highly intrigued by the information that he was sharing. And there were several questions that I had that I wish that I could ask. He escaped me that day, so I was not able to ask him that day, but at a subsequent meeting, we ran into each other again. So I approached him and asked him a few questions and says, hey, this would be really good for the commission to hear. He said, well, I'd be happy to come and talk with you guys. Chief Johnson, if you could please join us here at the podium. He is going to tee up a presentation that I think would be very helpful for the commission to hear. As you all know, this January, February, March, and the remainder of this year, we have been focusing heavily on city infrastructure matters, kind of parallel to what City Council is kind of studying. And in January, we had, I think, housing affordability. February, we had I'm drawing a blank. This month we have Charlotte Fire. Next month we have CMS. And then in May, we have Charlotte Water and Sewer. Again, the emphasis on infrastructure is just something that can help inform our work. And as these entities create their own planning projections, it would be good to hear what their considerations are. And so Chief Johnson and his team will be able to deliver that information to us for his department. Welcome, Chief Johnson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners, for having us here today. And I'm sure if you ask me any questions, I only scratched the mere surface of any answers. And that's why we have the subject matter experts that we have here today. And so we're very honored to be able to discuss with you all a lot of the decision making that we do as a fire department that really does tie into the decisions that you all make when it comes to providing services to the city. And I think the meeting that the Madam Chair was talking about was the infrastructure discussion that we presented to council to show that as we continue to grow and population continues to grow here, the fire department's in need of growing as well, because as you add population, it adds incidents. We ran over 143,000 calls last year, the most we've ever run, and I anticipate that those numbers will continue to climb as our population does. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the subject matter experts, and I'm going to bring up Battalion Chief Blake Redden, who is over our planning section, and they'll be able to introduce the rest of his staff and do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon. So I'm Blake Redden. I have the distinct privilege of leading Charlotte Fire Department Strategic Planning Division. And if I could ask the two ladies over here to stand, and I will introduce them. I have Kat Boyle on the left, and then Miriam Jha on the right. And then standing with me here is Miriam Martin, and we are the Charlotte Fire Department Planning Division. So today I'm going to turn it over to Miriam here in a second, and she's going to give you a preview of kind of how we determine need as Charlotte Fire Department, how we determine the need for new resources, the need for new facilities, and then kind of open up the curtain as to what she does on a daily basis for us and determining kind of like what's the process for determining where these facilities go. While not titled on paper, she is basically Charlotte Fire Department's data scientist, and I feel really privileged to have her on board. And I think you'll understand why I feel that way when you see what her work is here. So she's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to come back up and talk about our challenges that we're facing with development. We're also going to talk about some opportunities we see with the current development we're seeing in the city. And then if there's time, we'll talk a little bit about firehouses in general, the design of the firehouses, and also the different apparatus types. So without further ado, here's Miriam.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am Miriam, actually McManus. Now my name has changed. I am the senior management analyst for Charlotte Fire. As he said, though, I really act as more of a data scientist trying to figure out better ways to leverage data for the department. I also work in predictive analysis, and I manage the department's reporting as well. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the background as to where all of the things that drive station requests kind of come from. So the basis for these facility requests really starts out with three large organizations. The first of which is the National Fire Protection Association here on the left. They maintain a list of codes, standards, and guides, for example, fire code and building code, that are intended to prevent fires, and when fires do occur, provide guidance as to the best ways to effectively mitigate those incidents as quickly as possible. So the NFPA standard here that pertains most strongly to what I do is the NFPA 1710 standard. I'll get into that a little bit more later, but it basically outlines the minimum number of firefighters you need for specific type of incidents within a certain amount of time on scene. Now, so NFPA's list of codes and standards is kind of funneled through two other agencies, the Insurance Service Office, or ISO, and our accrediting agency. So these organizations come through about once every 3 to 5 years and evaluate our performance as a department, not just in terms of response times, but training and logistics, how we store things as well. And so that's really that's really what feeds our analysis. So what is NFPA 1710? So this outlines the amount of time that it should take for each segment of an incident to occur. So from the time that we pick up the phone, from the time of first dispatch, should be about 60 seconds for 90% of our calls. That is affected by alarm and call taking. Turnout time is the time from when they are first dispatched until the first unit wheels are rolling. That can be affected by station design a little bit, but really what drives our station location requests and new station requests specifically is that travel time. So for 90% of our incidents, there should be a travel time of 4 minutes or less for the first unit to arrive on scene. So any place where we can't meet that 4-minute travel is really where we start seeing issues pop up, especially where we have areas with increasing density. As you can see here, there's also this segment. So for a structure fire, we have 8-minute travel. Sorry, let me go back. So for that 8-minute travel, that is the amount of time for 16 firefighters to arrive on scene. And this is really the foundation for everything that I look at when we're looking at new station requests. I will also preface this entire presentation with the fact that NFPA changed that NFPA 1710 code a couple of years ago. They have expanded it to include specific building types. So here you have strip shopping centers. We need 28 firefighters on scene within 10 minutes and 20 seconds. That includes an 8-minute travel time. So that station placement is what's going to drive that 8-minute travel time. Additionally, we have garden apartments. So these are apartment buildings that are less than 75 75 feet tall. And then here on the right-hand side, we have high rises. That is basically everything that's 75 feet and above. So we need for fires at those types of facilities, we need 43 firefighters on scene. And we need that travel time to be 10 minutes and 10 seconds. So this is just kind of a picture of what responds to different types of incidents, just so that we know. So when we're building a new multifamily development that's less than 75 feet tall, this is what we need here, this is what we need there. So this is a standard EMS call. It just gets 1 engine, ladder, or rescue. Fire alarm, it gets 2 units, it gets an engine and a ladder. Vehicle crash, add on a battalion chief and a rescue company. For a standard single family house fire, this is the minimum response that you'll get. You'll get 4 engines, a ladder, and a battalion chief. Now, when we start getting into those garden apartment type facilities, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see 4 engines, 2 ladders, a rescue company, 2 battalion chiefs, and a safety officer. So imagine all of these companies pulling in around some of these newer developments that are kind of a little bit tight. It's getting a little bit difficult. For a high rise, this is actually what you'll see. This is the first alarm. So that is 8 engines, 4 ladders, 1 rescue, and 5 chiefs. So how do we determine we need new firehouses? So there are 3 different types of fire categories that firehouses fall in. For infill and annexation, the common theme behind these is that it's usually a growing massive incident somewhere where we cannot meet that 4-minute travel time. So this will be your Clanton Road was Station 43, which opened 2 or 3 years ago now. The next one would be Station 45 in Hidden Valleys area. As far as annexations go, you've got the River District and Miranda Road. And then you have replacement stations. Now, the replacement stations are usually the facilities that are basically out of date for some reason. They no longer serve the fire department's mission and functions necessary. So on the right-hand side, I've also listed out some support facilities that we've needed historically. I'm not going to talk about those as much today, but there are at least 30 NFPA codes dedicated to those types of facilities. So storage and warehouse facilities. There are 30 codes dedicated to how we select, store, use, maintain our equipment and our apparatus. For training, we have very specific training facility requirements in some cases that are driven both by ISO and NFPA. So this is my bread and butter. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So what software and data do we use? So about 5 years ago, CFD kind of got its hands on predictive incident modeling software, and the firefighters like to call it SimCity for fire departments. Basically, you can take stations and move them around. You can add new stations. You can take things away, and you can understand what the ripple impacts are of adding the station and figuring out how it affects response times and call volume for units across the city, not just in that localized area, which has been, it's really expanded on the capabilities of the department to understand where it's going to need new resources. So for example, for the Station 43 analysis, when we were looking at adding that on Clanton Road, we were able to determine, well, we're moving Station 30. We're moving Station 30 a little bit closer to this area. What if we go ahead and pretend that Station 30 is in its future location to Station 43? Is it still necessary? And we found that, yes, it was still necessary, even if we move Station 30 into that area. So in terms of the data that we use, I use a combination of historic and predictive response data. So usually when we're looking at historic data, we're looking at 5+ years of responses, which is well over 600,000 calls. We can also generate predictive response data sets based on property type trends and incident trends. And so that we can predict out a certain number of years or a certain percentage what those impacts are going to look like. We've run a number of analyses on it, from new station locations to resource optimization studies. So about every year for the past 5 years, I've run some kind of study on specific types of resources like ladders to evaluate their performance on calls where those units are required. And I can say with a good bit of confidence that all of our resources are pretty much in the best locations they could possibly be already, and there's not really much chance for optimizing any of our current resources anymore. So I'm going to go through a Station 43 example. This was the last one built. I believe it was October 2020, or is it when it opened up, or July, somewhere around there. And so leading up to that time, what we noticed was, well, population is growing along the light rail line here. It's driving more calls, and along with all this population growth, we're seeing more road congestion. We're seeing additional traffic calming and narrow streets to accommodate that growing population in that area. So we have more calls. We have a lengthened travel time, which means that we have a higher volume of incidents that are no longer meeting that NFPA 1710 standard of 4 minutes or less travel time. So I'm the data scientist. Figured this was the best way to put it. So it's really kind of a scientific process moving through this. So we identified that, we cannot do this thing in this area. We cannot meet the NFPA 1710 travel time. So, okay, what can we do about it? Well, we could try adding a unit at the nearest station, but that station is still like 5 or 6 minutes away. We're not going to meet that 4-minute travel time, even if we get a new unit at that station. So we started looking at different locations where we could put a station. We actually had several requests to look at city-owned property already, or property that was already city-owned rather, and 9 locations. So then I use my predictive incident modeling software to say, let's try a station here, let's try a station here, let's try a station in all of these different locations, and figure out what the impacts are going to be to response times and call volume for all the units in that area. And at the end of it, we came out that Clanton Road was the best option for a new station. So this is kind of what that looks like. This chart here on the left, these are the 9 locations that we considered. And the 2 shown in green here, Clanton Road and Orchard Circle, were the closest to that 4-minute time. You want this to be as short as possible, so you want this as close to that black dotted line as possible. In fact, it should be 4 minutes or less. We would still not be able to do that with the current Clanton Road location, but it is the best chance we have at meeting those response times. So we filtered it down to Clanton Road and Orchard Circle, and then you start looking at the feasibility of those parcels, and Orchard Circle had power lines that divided the parcel, a creek that divided the parcel, and we were going to have legal issues surrounding the rights of ingress and egress with that property, and it just made a lot more sense to go ahead with the Clanton Road location at that time. So this is what happened. big red excessive response. This is basically showing you excessive responses that were outside of that 6 minutes for the total response time, including phone pickup to arrival on scene. So you can see it used to be a big problem, and we still have some issues with excessive responses now, but it's not nearly what it used to be. And on the right-hand side here, you can see this is where we're at now. This is as of fiscal year 22, ending last year. So all of these stations marked in green are ones that currently are city-owned. The ones in purple are things that have been added to the list over time that we would consider. And so Station 45 up in Hidden Valley is kind of the next up on our list. We also have this area along Beatty's Ford and 77 that we're seeing increasing excessive responses at. We also have a lot of excessive responses out of the airport. So I know that one of the questions that we had gotten was about the 0.38 incidents per household. That is and how we project forward, how we project needs in new developments where we don't have any. The 0.38 incidents per household has remained relatively stable over the past 6 years. 2020, I'm sure you can imagine, was an anomaly. I would not rely on that data for any reliable insights. But it has stayed relatively flat, like around 3.38 for 6 years now. And I would estimate that that's probably going to continue. I do keep my eye on it though, and if it ever changes, I will let somebody know. Somebody also asked about the 2018 vendor study. So we had a vendor generate a predictive incident file for 2022 back in 2018. They did a pretty extensive analysis of like 19 different data sets that could feed incident trends. And ultimately, this was one of the things that they came out with was that for every new 1,000 housing units that were high cost, we would have 55 incidents. For low cost housing, specifically multifamily in this case, for every 1,000 housing units, we would have 598 incidents. So that's kind of projecting forward. That's one of the ways that we can project forward is if we know what type of land use it's going to have, or how many housing units it's going to be, we can, and the cost point, we can tell you that's about a good estimate. And that's based on data that's from 10 years. So it's not just a 2018 snapshot. It is based on trends from a good, I believe it was, Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 2007 to 2017, something along those lines. So I have a good bit of faith in those numbers. So at this point, I'm gonna give to Chief Redden so he can talk about new developments.
Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. So what challenges is CFD facing with new developments? One of those challenges that we're seeing is inadequate road widths. A lot of the newer developments are deploying residential alleyways or residential driveways. These tend to allow a 12 to 16 foot width. I think it's 12 feet for a single load driveway or alleyway and 16 feet for a double load. So basically garages on both sides. The significance of that for us is that ladder company you see right there in the middle picture has a 16-foot jack spread. So for it to set up and be stable to maneuver the ladder to either side of the truck, it needs at least 16 to 18 feet. So in this scenario, this is in South End, you see ladder 2 there. They're in what I presume is either a private drive or private alley, and they're having to set up in a fashion that we call short jacking, where they can't extend the left jacks, they have to drop them straight down. They have to override the safety feature of that apparatus and extend out over the sidewalk, which is also a possible issue if that sidewalk is not structurally sound enough for the weight of that truck. So this is a significant issue for us, being able to set up for a rescue in this type of situation. And we're seeing these developments throughout. You see the 3 pictures on the right. While that's not a full-sized apparatus, that's a chief's vehicle going through the different developments. And you see just the width allowed for that vehicle. So you can imagine if the larger apparatus have to maneuver in that area. Now, you'll see in the middle picture on the right that it's labeled a fire lane. We do have the privy to label or require a fire lane prior to the construction or even come in after the fact. But we don't always have the ability to police or enforce those fire lanes once they're instituted. So fire lane specifications and misuse, as I said, we can require fire lanes, and we do to some extent. The picture in the top right is also in South End. That's ladder 2, again, maneuvering through a fire lane that we actually came back and designated after the development was complete. One of the complications from doing that, though, is that you see now the sidewalk is being compromised by vehicle parking. You also see in this bottom, the large inset picture here, this is a clearly marked fire lane where residents have chosen to park outside of their garage. And then to the right of that is not the same development, but a fairly similar design where we actually had a fire that we were fortunate enough to be able to stop quickly. However, this particular fire occurred in an alley setting, and the company that arrived first had to back into position instead of being able to drive forward. Maneuverability and turning radius. This goes hand in hand with the street width complications that we're seeing. We've got improper parking and inadequate setbacks also. So in the left picture with the chief's vehicle there, you see that we've got parallel marked parking spaces, but we have a resident that's chose to park 2 vehicles perpendicular to the actual marked space. On the right, or in the middle rather, you see cars parking close to the corner of an alleyway and the main road. This becomes very problematic for our larger trucks to be able to make the corner there, because there's front swing and back swing that it's tough to describe, but if you drive a large vehicle, it's very tough to maneuver into a certain street when you're blocked by vehicles. On the right, you see the inadequate setbacks that we're referring to, that we're running into in the private and the residential driveways. I believe that there is 0 setback requirement in these types of development or on these types of streets. So that complicates us, again, being able to maneuver around those corners. This is also an issue with the actual building face to building face spacing. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So parking capacity and enforcement. Like I said, we struggle to be able to enforce parking. It's really not in our purview. While we can write tickets for parking violation that pertain to fire and life safety issues, we just really struggle with the capacity to do that right now. So we have to lean heavily on CMPD and Park It and other agencies. On the left, again, is that fire lane that you saw a second ago that the ladder company was maneuvering through. I can guarantee you that this is a nightly occurrence in this neighborhood. And it used to be worse until they really started enforcing towing. So a lot of your higher end developments, if you will enforce towing, and they'll actually tow people that illegally park. But this, I don't know if that's required or not, or if it's just elected for them to do. Also, you see right here in this picture, this vehicle is parked pretty much up against the curb, yet the vehicle itself is wider than the parking stall. I think our minimum parking stall or parallel parking width is 7 feet. Most vehicles are 6 to 6.5 feet wide. So you're basically allowing for 6 inches on either side of the vehicle if you park up against the curb. And I don't know many people that actually kiss the curb, if you will, with their tires. So that's also an issue when you talk about lane widths and door opening. So you have conflict with pedestrians getting out into the flow of traffic. On the right-hand side, you see a development with vehicles parking in the alley on the sidewalk itself. So traffic calming devices, we have a good relationship with CDOT. We work closely with them with multi-way stops and speed humps, speed cushions, speed tables. What you see pictured here is actually a fire truck friendly speed cushion that we've been working on with CDOT. The intended purpose of that is to allow our trucks to navigate through the gaps and not have to slow down as much. So one of the things we do as a division when CDOT sends us a traffic calming measure that they want to institute on a particular street, we will actually run an analysis of how much time delay that will create for our companies. And one of the things we've seen across the board is about a 5 to 15-second penalty that we issue onto the response time or the travel time of that apparatus. So as Miriam was talking about, we have a 4-minute window to get from our doorstep to your doorstep when you call 911. On day one, when that fire station opens, we know where that company can get to throughout its neighborhood. For every multi-way stop, every speed hump, speed table that gets added, that starts adding those penalties up. And there's sometimes when we're asked to put 3 or 4 or approve 3 or 4 speed tables or speed humps on a particular stretch of road. So as you can see, that can add anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute to our response time. But we acknowledge that there is pedestrian safety is very important. We want to achieve that, but we also want everyone to know that that creates complications with our travel times. So gate accesses, we see gates in a lot of areas, especially newer developments in South End. These definitely slow us down a little bit. We tend to require that we have what's called a Knox box controlled access. So when our companies pull up, all of our companies have a special key that they can put in the box and turn it, and it basically opens the gate for us. It still takes time to do that. And one of the other issues with gates that we see in this scenario, you see that there's an immediate T intersection just beyond that gate. So we have a large truck coming into this development that has to immediately turn right or left as soon as they come into the gate. And you'll also see, maybe you can or can't, there's a delivery truck just inside that's just going to be there for a minute. Hydrant placement and access. So there are hydrant standards in the city and protected by NFPA that you'll see down here. Hydrants have to have a 3-foot circumference clear area around them, and then a 5-foot clearance anywhere there's more than a 2.5-inch outlet. Every hydrant in the city has at least a 5-inch outlet that you'll see right there on the front, and then the 2.5s are on the side. And then newer hydrants have 2 5-inch outlets, so they would require 5 feet of clearance to either side. So what you see in this picture is just some of the things we're running into. Illegally parking or illegal parking. This is in one of the private residential roads where there's a sign and then another looks like a temporary sign within that 3-foot radius of the hydrant. And then right here, another brand new development where the hydrant is actually not given priority to the other utilities and kind of stuck in the back up against the building. So that not only complicates us being able to see where the hydrant is, but it creates issues for us actually being able to get to it, turn it on, hook hoses up to it, etc. And then the one on the right is one that's in a newer development. And it's open and clear and easy to see. So let's talk about a little bit about vertical growth. Vertical growth in some mindsets is good for the growth of a city, and it can at times appear that it reduces capacity on public service agencies. We've seen huge vertical growth throughout the city, but it's not just vertical. We've seen a growth, as I'm sure you're aware, in the floor plates of buildings that are being built in the city. So now what that causes is entire neighborhoods to now be in a single building. And so you heard Miriam talk about that 0.38 incidents per household. Well, if you've got 525 households now in one building, we're looking at a possible increase of 200 incidents a year just on us in that one building. And so not only is there an increase in incidents alone, but there's increases in our staffing requirements when we look at the higher buildings. And one of the things NFPA 1710 speaks to is the staffing of fire companies in dense urban environments. So if you see right here, an urban environment, I don't know, sorry, how do I back up? Yes, I was trying to make this talking go away. An urban environment, according to NFPA, is anything over 1,000 people per square mile. And then a dense urban environment per NFPA 1710 is anything over 3,000 people per square mile. What that changes is our minimum staffing. All of our fire companies, except for our 2 rescue companies, have a minimum staffing, daily staffing of 4 firefighters. In an urban environment, NFPA recommends or actually requires 5 firefighter minimums, and dense urban environments require 6 firefighter minimums. So why do we need more firefighters when you have a denser urban environment? It's because of the floor plate size and also because of the height of the building. We talk about the travel time or the response time to get from our doorstep to your doorstep. Well, now when we get to the doorstep of the high rise, we're not really at your doorstep. We're just parking at the foot of the building. There is a challenge of taking what's in our truck up to the floor where there's a fire. We don't take everything, but we take a good bit of equipment with us. So what you see in these pictures is what's called a standpipe operation. In a building where we can't just pull hoses off the truck and start squirting water from the truck, we use a pipe system called a standpipe system. That's what you see in the stairwells of the building. We plug the truck into an FDC down at the bottom ground level, pump water into the building, and then our firefighters carry hose on their shoulders or on their backs up to the floor below the actual fire floor. So if there's a fire on the 12th floor, we're going to the 11th floor in the stairwell. We're hooking up this system and then flaking hose up the stairs to wherever the fire is. That's very taxing on people and manpower, if you will. So that's why NFPA recommends a boost in staffing numbers on companies in dense urban environments. It also takes time to do that. We can pull a fire hose off a fire truck and charge it in a matter of 60 seconds or less. This takes minutes. So no matter what, fire events are going to occur. It doesn't matter how much we do prevention measures. It doesn't matter how much we teach or educate. It doesn't matter if the buildings are sprinklered or fireproof considered. This is a sprinklered building in downtown Charlotte several years ago. And as you can see, it's got a pretty significant fire event. So that's what we're looking out for. We know there's multiple things that we have to work around with new development. The city's growing. It needs to grow. It wants to grow. But our ultimate mission is to look out for the safety and well-being of the people that live in these buildings. So that's why we would like to try and come up with some opportunities to better our access and also look out for the safety measures of the different buildings. So some ideas for improvement. These are just some quick things we put together to discuss with you guys. It's not saying that we have to do any of them, but these are just some brainstorms. We found a fire department access performance-based design guide from Montgomery County, Maryland. I actually have that here if anybody wants to look at it. And there's a link in the presentation if you guys get the presentation sent to you. Also in the middle here, our recommendation is to increase the minimum width of roads and also the unobstructive face-to-face width of the buildings in these road type developments. I don't know what the appropriate terminology is that we're calling these. I call it a road development. So one of the actual design guide recommendations or standards from Montgomery County is that for anything below, any window sill below 27 feet, the spacing from face to face is 30 feet. Once you start having window sills above 27 feet, the spacing of face to face goes to 40 feet. And then we would like to require minimum turning radiuses and deter parking that complicates CFD apparatus maneuvering. We know that's difficult to do, but we think there's some opportunities for that. Fire-specific roadway marking requirements. I do know that we've got clearly marked green bike lanes in the city. There's also been some red painted bus lanes that we've observed. There's opportunity, I think, to mark fire prevention or fire protective measures, whether it be marking in front of fire hydrants or marking areas to keep clear for fire apparatus parking, if you want to call it a fire access lane or a fire access parking spot. But we just think there's opportunity there to either include color or some type of marking. On the right, you'll see an aerial view of our firehouse number 2. There is a clear line on the road where people should stop when the light in front of them turns red, but 9 times out of 10, cars will still park in front of the apparatus bay. We can move them with our sirens and horns, obviously, but it just delays our responses. So, you know, this would be a good opportunity to start a campaign. Some cities are doing it. I think Baltimore, New York, Seattle, Portland have a Don't Block the Box campaign. Whereas you see on the right, I think that's Plaza and Mecklenburg Avenue intersection. I don't know if we're actually doing this campaign or if this was a test, but that is kind of what we have in mind for like a Don't Block the Box. So you could put that in front of firehouses. You could put it at intersections. It could be in front of fire hydrants, in front of parking spaces for fire trucks at certain residential buildings and high rises and et cetera. And then we're seeing issues with street connections. We know that we can't, when one developer wants to develop a certain area, we can't always require them to develop the next site behind them or the site next door. And we do know that we're making great strides to assist with connectivity, but we still see what we feel is missed opportunities to require multiple entrances and exits into certain developments. The one in particular right here is one of the developments you saw pictures of. Grand Union Way has a single in and out exit, and honestly, there could have been some opportunities for like an entry or exit onto Clanton Road, but I know that there's other development standards that might have prevented that. On the far left, we've discussed this before. When we originally spotted Firehouse 38 off of Shopton Road, this Wingate Road extension was planned. That would have given that company direct access into this neighborhood here. Right now, we struggle to make response times into that neighborhood because the company's, I'm out of time, because the company's having to go around the neighborhood. And then right here, I know there's a new development coming up right now that could hypothetically connect Lower Lake Road, but I don't think it's been required to. And facilitating land acquisition. Miriam talked about our land acquisition for Firehouse 43. We oftentimes recognize and start asking for facilities and for land well in advance of when we actually get it. So if you see in the bottom left here, in 2014, when we first recognized the need for Firehouse 43, that's what the value of the land was. And then here's what the value was in 2019. And then 2.8 million is what we ended up paying. So there's a lot of opportunities, we think, also for public-private partnerships. As you see by the examples on the right, that's Washington, D.C., Engine 13 and Truck 10 at the base of a Hyatt hotel. I'm not recommending putting a firehouse in the base of a hotel because it doesn't get great reviews, but there are opportunities to put our facilities in the base of certain types of buildings. And in the bottom right is Arlington, Virginia, Station 10. Parking design in general is just one of our recommendations. I'm going to zip through the rest of these. We would like to work with you guys to look at opportunities to limit parking or either expand on parking. And one of the things that I didn't mention before, but should, is we don't feel that there's adequate parking requirements in certain developments placed on the developers. A lot of these households are multi-vehicle households. They're not single vehicle households. Even if they're not big families, they can afford to have other vehicles. So we're running into issues with parking capacity in these developments. And also, you know, when they have guests come over, is their parking adequate for the guests? And then you've got limitations with commercial nightlife and things like that in the area, people trying to find places to park. Emergency response parking enforcement, we see an opportunity to expand on this in the city and actually look for public safety needs throughout the city where hydrants are being blocked, fire lanes, et cetera. This is the Don't Block the Box campaign again. And then some other development ideas, just assisting us in going vertical, improving hydrant access. And then a quick idea that we had before the presentation was potentially like fire department specific zoning. We have several projects in process right now, and we feel like each one of them is kind of zone different. So it has different setbacks, and it's kind of tough for us to always keep that straight. And then expand capacity for CFD to collaborate with city planning. We're working with you guys. We're working with Catherine's group on the new UDO. We work with Holly and her planning group doing annexation work. But you've met the entire team. There's 4 of us. That's it. So we are literally at capacity, and the city is growing like wildfire. So we feel blessed to have what we have and be able to do what we do, but we also feel overwhelmed that we can't keep up and we can't look ahead because of that. So I'll leave it there. Do you have any questions? Sorry.
First of all, I just want to thank you. This was very fascinating, and I learned a whole lot that I'm going to apply on decisions in the future. One thing that I do see missing here, a lot of times you were talking about the impediment that size of vehicles has. I know DC unveiled an electric fire truck that's probably half the size of the current apparatuses. Is there any plans for Charlotte Fire to invest in those kind of vehicles so that they have a little bit more turning radius and like really, like I know that DC rolled out something even smaller than that.
Right. So
yeah.
Right now we do have an electric engine company on order, which is going to be the size of this truck here. Engine companies are really the smallest fire apparatus that we use right now. Our current engine companies are about 32 feet in length. We're looking to shorten that to 30 feet or less. As far as getting any smaller than that, it would be complicated. I do think we're looking at opportunities to supplement engine companies and ladder companies, if you will, but it's very difficult given the dense urban nature of the city and also the busyness of our companies to basically say, go out here in this smaller vehicle, but if there's a fire, come back and get your fire truck. It's a very complex dynamic that we struggle with. So right now, like we're trying to make these smaller and I'll go. So this is our standard ladder company. They're pretty long and heavy, 76,000 pounds minimum, 42 feet in length. Towers. And then what we're looking at doing, we've just ordered 2 tillers. Now that might look like it's going to be a nightmare to maneuver, but a tiller company, and this goes, it bends in the middle and it has a driver in the front and the back. So it can get to a lot of places easier than that engine company I just showed you, believe it or not. So we've got 2 on order, but it takes forever right now to have things like that built. So that's a move that we're making to actually, while the ladder company ultimately gets bigger, it gets easier to maneuver.
I don't know of a commissioner that might be around this CS who does not have a question. So I'm going to try to apply some order here. Chief Johnson, you must return. This, the charge that I gave you, you over-delivered. But it was necessary. So I asked Chief Johnson specifically about the challenges that CFD faces that are within our purview to address and to help him resolve. That was one of the charges when he was to come before us. And I got to be a little honest with you, this was painful to watch, but again, very necessary. My zoning committee members, I know you all have been diligently taking notes, but this is, as he was presenting several months ago, when I first saw some of this presentation, I knew it was worthy for us to get this information right away and to keep it in our purview. And I think Commissioner Russell has to leave here before we might get to the full agenda, but I just wanted to make mention to those working on the checklist for rezoning. I think we need to call out emergency management and public safety as its own separate section in that checklist as we're reviewing. I know we make mention to different types of infrastructure and public services, but having that as its own category so that we could just continue to keep that as a focus. Before we even get to the document, Will, we do have commissioners with several questions, and I want to be very conscious of Chief Johnson's time and the remainder of our agenda. So I will ask that if you have a very pressing question, that we take a moment to ask Chief Johnson and staff. But if there's something that you are willing to put on the back burner so that we can get through the remainder of our agenda, I would greatly appreciate it. And we can send the remainder of our questions to Chief Johnson and staff after our meeting. But I have Commissioners Walton, Winiker, Lansdale, and Gusman in that order, please. Commissioner Walton.
I will just tag on to Commissioner Seeley's notion of smaller vehicles, and I will ask your data person. There were several times, as Chairman has said, this could be looked at as painful, but it also looked to me as a slight indictment of the size of vehicles that you had, and more so than an indictment on the planning of the city. Has anybody considered what smaller vehicles would do to response time? And et cetera, et cetera.
So I'll talk a little bit about smaller vehicles, and then I can turn it over to Miriam to address the second part of your question. So we are in the process, just like you see the tillers here. This was one thing that we definitely had a discussion on, more maneuverability. So as we go into these apartment complexes, I call them Texas donuts, the ones with the parking garage in the middle, and they're living all around. They have a courtyard and stuff. We need to be able to gain access to those. So this is an attempt of the Charlotte Fire Department to not necessarily stop that type of construction, but to be able to adjust to it. We are in the process also of looking at our engine companies, which is one, making them smaller and getting away from the fact that we need to, if you don't know firefighters, we need to carry everything, right? You may only use that tool once in 20 years, but it needs to be on the truck when we need it. And so we're getting away from that concept. Additionally, we're also going to increase our overall pump pressures on our pumps. Right now, our stations in the uptown area and one station outside of uptown are our high pressure engines just for high rises. Going forward, all of our engines will have high pressure pumps because we know that high-rise structures are going down South Boulevard and Ballantyne, and pretty soon they'll be all over the place. And so we're making some changes to adjust to the changing environment. And Madam Chair, this in no way says that, we're not pointing a finger at anyone, right? I really appreciate you offering the invitation because it's a time for us to talk and actually work together going forward to get what we need to get done for the city and planning and that, as well as making sure that the fire department's taken care of. So Miriam.
I'm not sure that I had much else to add, but could you, I guess, elaborate a little bit more on what specifically you're looking for in terms of impacts to response times?
The response time figures that you computed were done using the vehicles that you have, correct?
Yes.
Did you do a A/B analysis wherein you did a response time analysis using a shorter vehicle, a smaller vehicle, or a more heterogeneous mix of vehicles to accomplish the same task?
That is not something that we actually currently have the capacity to do. I would need to know what the difference in the dynamics of those vehicles would be, how fast they would travel along our specific roads. The software that we use also doesn't necessarily have the ability to determine that this is a much smaller vehicle. This vehicle can go faster. That is something that we have actually requested that the vendor enable us to do, but that is not something that we currently can do.
Okay, all right, that's fine. It just, we've all been in places where there are smaller fire trucks and they accomplish firefighting there. And so just wondering what the impact would be. And if you guys have considered it, if you haven't considered it, I would just put out there that you consider it going forward.
And we could do that. And we're still limited by speed limits. Even NFPA has a limit on how fast your fire trucks can go as well. And so we need to take that in consideration, but we appreciate the question and we'll go back and see what we can do.
I will add that NFPA does specify a minimum amount of equipment and water be available. So there's a limit on how much we can draw down those units. There is a minimum size for those, and I don't know exactly what it would be. That is not my area of expertise, but
yeah, that's why I mentioned the notion of a heterogeneous mix of vehicles as a way to deliver equipment, as opposed to, there was a fire next to me and there were 4 of your big trucks in my front yard. But they weren't all pumping water on the thingamabob because some had equipment over here and there, and et cetera. Like you say, you're going to use the tool when you need it, right? But if you did a different mix of that, and you guys are you know what you're doing, so I'm going to leave it to that.
Thank you.
Chief Johnson, if you remember, when I did catch up with you, that was one of the first questions that I asked you. I actually remember writing it down back in December. What efforts or resources are being explored in regard to innovative solutions to help manage growth and to help navigate in communities with navigation issues, like those older communities that have narrow street widths to begin with, no sidewalks, et cetera. So maybe as a follow-up, that wasn't a question for now. Commissioner Winokur, please.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit, and for perspective, I've read a number of different articles in the last couple of years talking about different sizes of vehicles appropriate for an urban environment. And I just want to reference this one. This is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, a study published in 2018 called NACTO and the USDOT Volp Center release, Best Practices for Redesigning Large Vehicles in Urban Environments. And that's, if you Google that information, you can find it. I'm saying that for the public, not just for you guys. But, I remember in the 80s growing up here, the initial backlash from the Charlotte Fire Department when people were putting speed bumps in the road, and how that would be, an anathema. But now obviously we're moving to a more urban environment, trying to establish more alternate means of transportation. So, and just to give you guys the feedback, like from a member of the public, to say, well, we need wider roads, we need wider intersections, we need dedicated, we need better parking and more parking to accommodate more cars. And my feedback is that that's not the direction I think the city wants to go or should go. Not more cars, not wider roads, not wider intersections. That those all promote much higher risk of danger to pedestrians and other people that are using the road. So as we all jockey for limited resources, whether it's space for fire centers or space on the road, I think that looking at vehicle size seems to be low-hanging fruit, as opposed to keeping in a mindset of our suburban sprawl city that we've been for most of, Charlotte's transportation recent history. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Lansdale.
Thanks very much. I know how hard it is to procure a new vehicle. You keep at it. You do what you need to do to get whatever you need to make us safe here. But I want to say one statement before I ask my question. Thank you for the glaring recognition of conflict between the street skyline and the Charlotte Fire Department's safety requirements for street width. And most of the issues that we saw in your pictures are driver compliance issues. Driver compliance issues associated with the CAFE standards under the 44th president. So that allowed trucks and vehicles to get bigger and bigger and bigger, whereas our lane widths did not change at all. So thank you for that. The second thing is I'd heard part of this presentation, and this is more specific to those on the zoning. You had mentioned, I think in a previous presentation to the city, that for every residence that is created, it increases 38 seconds, or you had a number for every time a new, from an R1 to an R3, it increases response times by X. That's what I recall. Do you recall?
So that was what Miriam was talking about the 0.38 calls for service. So for every new apartment, townhouse, house, living unit, basically, it's calculated as 0.38 calls. So when you say, hey, we're going to have a high rise of, 500 units, well, that's 500 times 0.38 additional calls for service if it's a new building. And so our Station 22 right there off Sugar Creek ran over 5,500 calls last year, right? After 3,500, you become less reliable. Right down the street from them, I know for sure is a new townhouse community that's going in that has at least 75 to 100 units. So multiply that times 0.38, that's additional calls of service for them. So every time we have one of those up and down North Tryon, in Uptown, going down down Davidson and some other places where these apartment buildings are going up all over. You can multiply each one of those apartments by 0.38. That is what our numbers have shown for at least the past 6+ years.
Thanks.
Commissioner Gusman.
Try. Thank you so much. This has been great. I know in my 5.5 years of serving, I have voted enthusiastically for every mandatory referral to purchase land for a firehouse and every rezoning that needed it. And sometimes in the face of significant community opposition, which it befuddles me. But
Thank you.
aside from that point, I see that you're using 75 feet as your delineation between high rise and I understand that's how you fight those fires is drives that number. Even some of our Texas donuts are getting well over 75 feet, and we're now seeing them all over the county. So speaking to some of the points of flexible equipment for the environment, we're going to see more of that density. You guys know that. Just wanted to highlight, we almost now don't even consider it a high rise if it's not over like 100 feet, 120 feet. So there is a changing, I don't know, an evolution of our built environment that we all need to continue to work and deal with. On the lane width, I just quick comment. We have this problem both in our new developments, you guys have pointed out very well. We also have it in our old parts of our city, where we have on-street parking in old little neighborhoods and things like that. We've got alleyways. Many times those weren't built to any standard that we have in any way could have impacted now. Those smaller vehicles potentially make accessing those spaces easier. I know my street has parking on only one side in order to make sure we have room for the full fire truck to fit down it, and they do. Very happy about it. But yeah, there's a yard crew or something blocking the other lane, and that's an enforcement issue. But it doesn't go away even if we get to say we're going to put in all 25 feet alleyways. I would like to see more of those, perhaps. That's a good point. And we'll certainly take that forward on zoning. But thank you guys again.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners Gusman, Walton, Winokur, Lansdale. So you'll be back tomorrow?
Sure. We're available.
I do have two questions that are kind of pressing for me. I think, who on your staff actually does your review of rezonings?
So right now, only our prevention staff reviews rezonings. We're trying to work out an opportunity for planning to start to engage in those. But like I said, we're tapped. So we're coming up with some ideas to be able to put eyes on some of the rezonings so that we can look at it as far as, what does this mean for us going long term, and what are the implications of this for operations standpoint. One of the issues that we have in some of the developments that I showed pictures of is just when our reviewers in prevention review plan, they're looking for fire code issues. And so some of these things aren't fire code issues. They're just things that cause us problems. So there's a balance between what we can and can't look at and what we can and can't make recommendations against. So we're working on that.
Thank you, Blake. And I think I heard you mention that you do work closely with CDOT in terms of, you mentioned one or two instances. Does that also apply to the rezoning process? Are you partnering at that point? And how early is that in a rezoning process? I'm not sure if you guys have that information readily available.
So right now, I believe prevention gets plans each month whenever the rezonings get sent out. So I think it's a packet of 20 or so. And whenever those get sent out, I think that's when the review process happens.
Okay.
And something I want to clarify is that prevention really only looks at the design. They don't look at the impacts. They don't have a way of estimating the number of calls or the impact response times. That is very, very much what our team does. And so when they look at, when you're asking them to review things, that's not what they are reviewing. We don't currently have anybody really reviewing the impacts to call volume or response times.
Well, if nothing else, I think you found some new advocates here. And actually, Miriam, this last question is for you. You showed a data point that indicated a relationship between housing costs and number of incidents. Can you elaborate on that relationship?
Yes. All right, let me see if I can get back there real quick. All right, there we go. This one?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So this is what the vendor that ran that analysis came up with. He found that in order to accurately project out the incidents that we were going to be looking at in 2022 from 2018, that there were huge variations between the cost of housing specifically for multifamily. Would you like to expand on maybe some of the reason behind that?
I mean, I can try. So this obviously was a third-party vendor that probably took a lot of our information, at least the last 5 to 10 years worth of data, and we're able to show this as a housing cost need. If you're talking just about the socioeconomic abilities of people, I think that plays a big role into how many times you call 911, right? If you have necessary health care, then you go to a doctor or urgent care or whatever. Some people use 911 as part of the healthcare, and so then you start getting more of those type of emergencies. And so I think it does play out that this is the information that we have.
Thank you for that additional context. And Blake, were you going to add something?
I was going to add one more thing. One of the things ideally that we would love to be able to do is to work with Catherine's group with the new UDO and kind of take a look at like, how do these different portions of the city look to develop, and then start comparing existing call volumes with similarly developed areas in the city with those areas, and be able to forecast long-term. If the city builds out, excuse me, the way the UDO wants it to, then what does our call volume look like? And we could pair up. So NFPA standard has certain occupancy types, but we know the UDO also has certain neighborhood types and occupancy types. And we would kind of like to merge those and have a consistent language. So when we say senior living, it means the same thing.
Okay, thank you. And I think Allison wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, I believe both Blake and Miriam, you were on the interdepartmental team. Is that correct? Okay, so it's very important as we continue in these planning efforts to make sure that we are coordinated and that they are involved, and we are starting to talk together about how we're managing future growth. And it's great to have both of you on that particular team, and look forward to planning forward together. So thank you.
And again, Madam Chair, you said that you all are advocates, and we would really appreciate that as their priorities are pretty full right now, and to be able to actually participate in this is probably something that's very important, but they don't necessarily have the capacity to do so.
Like I don't think I can say a word here that can really explain the value of your presentation today. So thank you, Chief and staff. And no, it was not interpreted as a finger pointing. This is definitely something very collaborative, but no one would have been able to deliver this perspective better than your team. So we wanted to hear directly from you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all. And
the pieces of homework, I think I asked, Blake and I were communicating offline, and I told him to add in the presentation a specific ask of the commission, and you guys delivered. So thank you again.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And with that, Allison, you want to tee up what we'll hear next on the agenda from Catherine and team?
Sure, thank you. So next, we're going to get an update on the community area planning process. Of course, we have now officially kicked this off. So we are live, 14 plans, 2 years, as we keep saying. So Catherine's going to go over briefly, talk a little bit about engagement, but really more specifically about what the workshops are going to look like. So very excited to have those kicking off very shortly. And really, back to your action request. So really, again, the action for you all, of course, is please be involved, attend, and spread the word about these activities. So I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll try to make up a little bit of time to keep us on schedule. Catherine Mahoney, Senior Project Manager with the Long Range Division and a part of the community area planning effort. We'll, as always, start with a little overview of what our work is and why we're doing it, highlight some of our recent engagement, and then spend the majority of our time on our workshop or what you can expect from that. Let me start. Okay, so you guys have seen this slide a lot. It is really the foundation of the work that we're doing. Our comprehensive plan provides that overarching framework for how we want to grow and change over the next 20 years. And the first step to implementing that plan was to translate the place-based policies, or those that provide guidance for how and where we should develop, to specific geographies. And so we took the first pass at our policy map, and that was adopted. And now we're moving on to a lower level, or the next level of community of planning, called community area plans. And an important part of all of this visionary work is the regulations that our Unified Development Ordinance team manages, and they successfully developed in partnership with other departments our new ordinance standards for how things can be built. And they're going to be working on mapping those zoning districts over the next few years. So community area planning, like I said, is the next step into putting our citywide vision into action. It will build upon that vision and guiding goals and policies within the comprehensive plan. We're not redoing any of that work. Instead, we're providing the next level of guidance for things like land use, mobility, capital investments. And by doing 14 concurrent plans over the next few years, we're offering a more equitable and efficient process than in past efforts. As a reminder, our work will be done over, it's a 5-step process that we'll be doing over the next few years. We're scheduled to complete the first 4 steps over the next 2 years in particular. We kicked off phase 1 in January, and through that effort, we identified the community's priorities based on existing needs, in particular, their needs to housing diversity, access to goods and jobs through our community reports, which have been published. This month, we're moving into step 2, which is called Creating Great Places. It will begin at the end of the month with our first workshop, and conclude at the end of the year with our final workshop. And throughout this year, what we're doing is working with the community to ensure that the place type designations support the community's needs and priorities for the future. In 23, we'll be working with our interdepartmental partners to identify projects and programs that are needed to support the vision, and then also developing an implementation strategy, which gives us all an idea of how the work can be done or put into action over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And then as a reminder, review and adoption is scheduled to begin in 25. The expected outcomes of this effort will be 14 individual plans that provide guidance for growth and development. These plans are intended to be used in decision-making processes, such as identifying prioritization and funding for capital investments, and also by yourselves in development proposals or the review of development proposals. When adopted, the place type recommendations or refinements within the plans will be incorporated into our 2040 policy map. And we expect that we'll learn of future revisions that are needed within our comprehensive plan, and we'll carry that forward. As a reminder, what you can expect from a policy document, it's intended to inform decision-making, but it does not create rules or regulations. It will identify needed investments, but it doesn't earmark funding for them. It may recommend zoning changes, but it does not automatically rezone property upon adoption. And then the intent is to guide development, not stop it. So I mentioned we kicked off in January, and we have an engagement strategy that's aimed at being equitable and inclusive. We've talked about this before. We have 3 buckets of tools at our disposal: constant, coordinated, and collaborative. We've been using a lot from each bucket at this point. And as we move through this process, we'll start reporting on how we're engaging, who we're hearing from, and what we're hearing. Right now, because we're so early in the process, we're just setting up our tracking system, making sure things are in order, and that we're able to measure the success rates that we're projecting towards. So we know that our website is one of our main tools, and it's being heavily visited right now. Some of the online resources like our toolkit and our videos are starting to see modest use. And so we're going to allocate some marketing resources to drive up that activity. And then we've started to use a number or reach out to a number of our partners, you all, for example, and elected officials. We've also been attending some external meetings, primarily at town hall meetings, but starting to spread the word that way. So I'll move into the workshop overview. Essentially, these workshops throughout 23 are focused around phase 2, which is ensuring that our place type designations are aligned with the community's needs for growth and development. And so the objective of these workshops is to collect information which may collect information which will inform place type refinements. Okay, so we're not changing the map in person at these workshops. We're asking questions, collecting feedback, and then we'll analyze and apply that feedback systematically. The refinements will need to do 2 things. One, they'll need to advance the goals of the comprehensive plan, and then ensure future development supports the community's needs, right? So it needs to do a multitude of things, and it's not just a willy-nilly change. These workshops, you can see kind of the draft agenda at the bottom of the screen. It'll have several components, and I'll walk through the intent of each over the next few slides. This gives you an idea of kind of the flow of the components and the approximate duration. I'll note that the real meaty parts of the agenda, which include the presentation and the discussions, we will translate to an online version. And so you can participate both in person or online throughout 23. So to open and end the workshop, we're going to have our interdepartmental drop-ins. This was kind of an approach that was tested mid-2000s with our previous planning efforts, and really proven successful for the community members to have this one-stop shop for coming to the city, asking questions and getting information. So we essentially invite our interdepartmental partners. You can see them listed here on the screen. They have a table around the perimeter of our room, and guests are invited to just ask questions. If they have a traffic question, there's a CDOT table. If they have a fire question, there's a fire table, and get the information they're looking for. And then it also provides the departments an opportunity to promote their work, right? So it's a good symbiotic relationship. And we'll have some time at the beginning of the workshop and at the end for this item. The next component of the workshop will be our presentation, in which we explain to the community why we're doing this work, what it includes, and what the expected outcomes will be. We'll spend some time talking specifically about that geography and its needs, and then we will break out into, or we'll provide an overview of the activity and really explain how the activity is going to inform our process. So for the table discussion, as I mentioned, we're collecting input at these workshops. So the objective of the discussions is to facilitate a conversation in which we can collect input. We're facilitating conversations around key locations. So they're real life examples about where potential refinements could take place to both advance the goals of the comprehensive plan and meet the needs of the community. The format that we're using, I'll walk through an example of that on the next slide, but the format we're using is kind of speed dating. I need to think of a better term, but we'll have a series of tables. Each table will focus or feature a different location, and that location, through that location, we ask a series of questions, and the community responds to them. It's really valuable to hear what other participants have to say or what their thoughts are. And we're seeing these conversations as being 15 to 20-minute intervals. So you can either sit at one table for the entire breakout session, or you can move and rotate throughout the tables as you're interested. So here's an example of a tabletop discussion. If you can imagine in your mind, well, let me say, this is an example, since we have you all here today, and so you can all kind of understand what to expect. At Planning Committee, we'll provide a more detailed example. We'll have the complementary visuals and walk you through a specific location. So if you're interested in that and not on the Planning Committee, you can, if your calendar allows, join us. But in this example, if you can picture maybe a small auto-oriented retail location that is currently recommended to evolve into a neighborhood activity center in the future on our policy map. The types of discussions and questions that we'll be having around this area, first is we want to explain why this area is recommended to evolve, both from the comprehensive plan's perspective, it's advancing our 10-minute neighborhood goal, and from the community's need, it provides better access to daily goods and services. We want to talk about some of the potential trade-offs with that evolution and how we could balance or need to balance other priorities with this type of change. So for example, if we have a commercial area evolving to neighborhood activity center and surrounded by in-one place types, are there any refinements on the map that could be made that would help ensure that transition occur, in a way that protects both the neighborhood and provides the additional access to goods and services that are needed? So it's really a conversation using our visuals to help the community understand and provide their input. And then after the speed dating, we'll reconvene and explain how their work is, or how their input's going to inform the process, how we're going to track it. We're going to be very transparent about all the input that we receive. We have a spatial tracking system, so basically an online map where if you make a place-specific comment, you can see that comment and how we're responding and how it's being incorporated into the process. And then a more thematic catalog, which will essentially be an Excel sheet on our website. But just being very clear about how we're tracking our information and responding to it over the next few years. And then what are the next steps in the process and how they can engage, both if they want to participate in other geographies throughout the year or what's next for that geography in 24. So that's an overview of the workshop. I know I went quickly. We can come back to any of the slides. The call to action is similar to what it has been over the last few months. Please help us in promoting these workshops. We now have dates, times, and locations available on our website. We're asking people to register so we can prepare accordingly. And then we have the resources on our website, like the Ambassador Toolkit, that make it easy for you guys to push and promote on our behalf. So I'll stop there and take any questions you may have.
Thank you so very much. I think we have a few. I'll go first though, because some level setting for those who are trying to anticipate their engagement in this process. So right now, staff has ironed out, I think from end of March through the beginning of September in terms of the engagement, this phase of engagement. It's kind of mapped out already. I think that's what we've already kind of advertised in terms of engagement opportunities. But if I'm on Westside, for instance, and I think the Westside has some of the first engagement sessions there. So if I'm thinking I'm going to, plug in March and April, when is my next opportunity to plug in for my geography, for instance? Like, is it the next time we see a West and I'm supposed to come back? So can you kind of level set for those who are trying to map out how they can connect?
Yeah, let me make sure I'm understanding, because I was toggling back and I want to make sure I heard the first part of your question. Assuming I'm a resident and I'm living on the West Side and I know that my workshop is end of March, I participate and then I want to know when I can share more information. How do they track that?
Like, when's my next workshop coming to me? Like, if I'm trying to map out the rest of the summer, I'm going to plug in here, here, and here.
So we'll be in each geography one week of the calendar year at 3 different dates. So if you're only interested in the West Inner, there will be 1 week where you can participate in person at the workshop. However, we have a suite of other options if that doesn't work, right? You can attend our office hours every month. We'll be in your geography, or you can participate online. So and then we have to be clear at the workshops that we will not be back here for another workshop until 24 when we move into phase 3.
Clear.
Okay.
And then in the suite of tools that we're using to engage, I'm reminded that Joint Use Task Force is there.
Mm-hmm.
some folks that I've had some recent interactions have noted that joint use task force meeting information is not the easiest to find. Do you happen to know where that information is located? It seems to be buried in the city's website.
We have a share folder. So if you're a member of that team, you have direct access to all the files. That's probably a question for Alberto, who manages that interdepartmental coordination.
But just to be able to like attend a meeting, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, it's an internal meeting. We don't publicize them.
Okay.
It's a staff meeting,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
our website is currently undergoing a rehaul. So some things that were probably easy to access probably a month ago, not so much today, because they're making some pages live and not and testing. So the entire city is doing a rehaul on our websites.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Commissioner Wilden?
Hi, thank you for all of this. So I kind of have two questions. How many registrations for the workshops do you have so far?
Very low numbers. We have goals of hitting 100 or 50, 100 minimum for each geography for in-person events, but we have other measures of success for the entire engagement effort.
And then I saw that the social media numbers were incredibly low. So I'm wondering what handles y'all are using, because I was just on Facebook and the Charlotte Planning, Design and Development Department page hasn't been posted on in over a year and a half. So I'm just wondering.
If our communications team is listening, please don't have a heart attack.
I'm just asking.
They are wonderful, and this is a problem beyond their control.
No, that's totally fine. I'm just curious.
Facebook, for some reason, has flagged our page. They've been doing everything they can to get it back up. We have an Instagram account, and corporate communications is going to go above and beyond for us throughout the next few years because of our page's current status. So
sorry for the sore spot.
yes, it's very sore.
If you have any connections at Facebook, anyone, please let us know.
I'll say the social numbers at the end of our last effort with Policy Map were really good, and with the comprehensive plan. So I wouldn't take this as a sign of what's to come.
Yeah, me too. Assuming they'll increase surely. Commissioner Gusman.
Yeah, so you said that, well, my first question, I think this is easy. Will the office hours, will you be able to receive feedback and comment on any of the areas? Or
That's a great question. You should be able to, but I need to make sure that that's clear for our staff.
the ones that are inactive, most definitely, I'm sure, but the ones that are still 6, 9 months, 10 months, 12 months out, maybe not so much, or?
Yeah, we those specific exercises will not yet be available, but the general types of feedback we can collect either spatially or thematically. So yes.
Okay, because on the breakout, that looked attractive to me for some of the people who've reached out and said, well, how are we participating? And I'm like, well, register, you'll get the invites. And they were like, well, no, I want to do it right now. And I was like, well, office hours are starting next month. So maybe do that. But then I realized I needed to know if they're going to be told, oh, we're not talking about that right now.
No, we'll receive feedback on all geographies. Again, this is part of being equitable and inclusive. So, but Alicia, you want to add to that?
If I could add,
Yeah.
there are two components of the process that help residents who are eager to start participating. The community workbook is a way for those areas or residents or neighborhoods who are waiting on their workshop to get started. So that's one way for them. It's a series of activities they can convene around or participate in just to get themselves ready for the conversation. The other piece is the Ambassador Toolkit. You can start planning for your neighborhood or start getting the word out to your neighborhood to help make the process more robust when we get to you. So there's two ways that people can start to get ready for when the workshop comes, so they won't feel like they're just sitting and waiting, not participating. Those two things will help them get started So when we get to their neighborhood, they're ready. And to help get people more involved in the process, they can use the ambassador toolkit to help.
I like
with
it. I think if all the neighborhoods had those pre-meetings even, or that little bit
Yeah.
of coming together,
Right.
these conversations move a lot faster when we
Yeah.
move to the broader.
Exactly.
I'll leave it at that. I think we're good. Thank you, guys. This is, looking forward to this.
I think the community reports too that are on the website can be good conversation starters for neighborhoods looking to get set in the block, so to speak. Join us on Tuesday, March 21st
21st, yeah.
to nerd out a bit more on this process. If you guys have any additional questions or need additional peek. Again, trying to respect our agenda time. I'm going to turn it over to Allison now, who will give us an update on UAC and UDO.
Very good, thank you. So as we talked many times throughout the development of the UDO, that we were viewing this as a living document, we'd be coming back before you all with text amendments. And that's where we are today. There are 4 text amendments being proposed at this time, 3 to the UDO and 1 to the tree ordinance. If you recall, everything that's development related lives in the UDO, but we still have things that are not development related that are regulated by the tree ordinance. So of the 4 that we're talking about, 2 of them are really minor corrections, cleanup, adjustments, things that, are really just to make the administration of the ordinance easier. The other 2 have policy implications. So one of them relates to LCID. So this is the landfill. I think you probably all have heard a little bit about this in the news. So we're modifying in the UDO what that looks like and where it's allowed going forward. The second one that we'll talk about that I wanted to spend a couple minutes explaining is the allowance for residential and our commercial areas, and then also the prohibition for drive-throughs. So we have some parts of our community that will translate to a commercial zoning district on June the 1st, but they have a place type that is center-based. And so we are wanting them to be in the future to be more pedestrian-oriented, mixed use, that type of place. And when we go through the alignment rezoning, we would be aligning the zoning district to that place type. But of course, as you all know, we're not going to get to alignment rezoning today or on June 1st. And so this is really, that amendment is helping create a bridge so that we are making sure that the regulations that are governing those future centers are more center focused. And so so when we start talking about, I think Alan's given that presentation, when we start talking about that particular text amendments, that's the why. I just wanted to explain that to you all. So, and I will turn it over. I think we're doing, is Tim up first? Okay. Or Alan. Okay, all right. Now I'll turn it over to Alan.
Tim is up first, and then I'm going to go stand with you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Porter, Chief Urban Forester. As Allison mentioned, with the tree ordinance, quick review, all development regulations are now living in the Unified Development Ordinance. It's much more of a focused, the tree ordinance that's remaining is focused on operations, protection of city trees and public right of way. And there is a heritage tree component in there as well that's non-development related. So there's 4 modifications proposed. The first 3 are just labeling errors out of sequence. If you think about bulleted outline, we just kind of skipped one mistakenly. So we were correcting 3 errors. The 4th modification is adding language that clarifies the use of the city to use revenue collected during ordinance enforcement related to fines that have been assessed that can now be used to further the intent, purpose, scope of the tree ordinance's requirements. And that's it. That's essentially it. So
Is there one more slide for you?
Yes, a little more detail here. Again, just thank you, Ellen, three minor sequencing mislabeling errors, and the red text is the language that's being proposed to be inserted. Historically, for the past few, I'll say decades, fine revenue had to be sent off to the state for use of education purposes. A change in a general statute in the summer of 21 allows this to be used locally for a tree canopy. Intent and spirit requirements specified in the tree ordinance. Any questions?
Just one, or at least so far. Can you provide an example of how you would apply number 4 for that applying civil penalties to further efforts for the tree ordinance? Give me an example or two.
Sure. For example, we have internally talked with the attorney's office about using fine dollars to produce tree protection signage that says tree protection zone, do not enter. That clearly ties to multiple tree ordinance protection regulations and land development standards. So it clearly connects to something we're already doing. It's already mandated by an ordinance, and it furthers the intent to have signage to potentially give out free to customers, property owners. That's one example. Did that answer your question? Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim. Any other questions for Tim?
Welcome back.
Have any questions? Tim, we have a question for you. I would answer, but I'm not Tim. Commissioner Powell has a question for you.
Can you use the fine dollars to plant new native trees?
It's my understanding, yes, as long as we connect it to some type of tree planting effort we're already doing, or that's outlined within the tree ordinance. So yes, we could.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, Alan.
Thank you. I'd like to just go over our 3 text amendments in the little time we have left. And I've got a good excuse now to talk to the chief about a ride along, I think. See some of those issues. I used to drive a fire truck as a volunteer many, many years ago. So our cleanup text amendment, we won't spend a lot of time on talking about this, and I've only got this one slide, but it's generally just fixing mistakes that are in the adopted UDO, misspellings, references, and things of that nature. No major changes to this. So I'll move on to the next couple of text amendments that do have some policy implications. The next one, for lack of a better term, we're calling commercial uses in certain place types and drive-throughs. Just as a reminder, we've got 10 place types in our comprehensive plan, and 9 of them have got a menu of zoning districts that are recommended to be used in their parks and preserves. They can go in any zoning district. We're going to be talking about our commercial districts in this text amendment, but just as I think these slides are okay, just to go over what our commercial place types are. Generally, these are auto-oriented commercial places where you'll find retail and services and restaurants and things of that nature. They're very different from our activity centers, of which we have 3, and you'll see those on the right side. So our smallest is our neighborhood center. It's a mixed-use walkable area, typically serving the needs of the surrounding neighborhood. Our community activity centers are a little bit larger, and they draw an audience of users from a greater area. And then finally, our regional activity centers, such as our uptown area, or in this case, South Park in this example, are drawing from a wider geography. So just kind of keep those place types in your mind as we go ahead and talk about this. The issue that we're trying to address with this text amendment is that we have some current parcels that are zoned B1 or B2 that will translate to general commercial CG on June 1st when the UDO goes into effect. Some of these areas are in our center's place types. So when they translate, the CG district, A, doesn't allow multifamily, and B, does allow drive-through. And both of those things are contrary to our goals for our centers. We want multifamily in our centers, and we don't want necessarily drive-throughs. So what this text amendment is going to do, if it's approved, would be to allow multifamily in a community, in a general commercial CG zoning district, if that district happens to be in one of our 3 centers place types. The second thing that it would do would be to disallow or only allow through a conditional zoning a drive-through, which both of those things would normally be allowed, excuse me, if they were in a different place type. So just to go over a couple of definitions, because this can get a little confusing. A drive-through establishment is a principal use. It is the kind of thing that you can only visit via a drive-through lane, like the little coffee shop up there. It doesn't have any walk-in. You can't walk into this little place. You can only buy your coffee if you're in your car. That's different than a drive-through facility, which is an accessory use to another principal use, like a restaurant or a bank or a dry cleaner or something, or a pharmacy or something like that. So a drive-through facility, which, not to confuse you even more, we're going to change the name of that in the text amendment to accessory drive-through, because we think it clarifies it a little bit better. And then I think you all know what a multifamily dwelling is. It can be either attached or a stacked multifamily. So what this text amendment will do, and I've outlined this already, it would permit multifamily dwellings in the commercial CG and CR zoning districts if they are located in a neighborhood activity center or a community activity center or a regional activity center. And if you do develop multifamily in that CG district in those places, you would develop under the neighborhood commercial or the NC standards. The other thing is that it would require, the text amendment would require a drive-through establishment. Remember, that was the standalone drive-through. Going forward, that would only be allowed in either a commercial or a manufacturing and logistics place type. And then, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to do a drive-through in a CG or CR district in a center, it would require a conditional rezoning, and the development of that would be subject to the neighborhood center zoning district standards. So this is just an example of how that might play out. This happens to be on 7th Street in Elizabeth, and the purplish color is a neighborhood center place type. This is an actual example. That parcel is currently zone B1 and is going to translate to CG. And you can see a photo of it on the right, that little strip center you may be familiar with. If that were to redevelop in the future without this text amendment, you couldn't do a multifamily on that site, and maybe that's something that you might want to do there or would support the goals of our center. And you could by right do a drive-through. So if this text amendment passes, it would kind of fix those inconsistencies. That's the last slide I have on this text amendment. Madam Chair, do you want me to go through the last one and then come back for questions, or stop here before I talk about the LCIDs?
Can we jump to LCIDs?
Sure. That is the next one. So just to, so we're all on the same page, an LCID is a land clearing and inert debris landfill, and it is generally a facility where you dispose of inert debris and land clearing debris and yard waste and things of that nature. The issue that we're trying to address with this text amendment is that there have been some community concerns raised in the past few months about the environmental and land use impacts of these landfills on the community. The UDO, as adopted last August, would have permitted this in all zoning districts across the city. A lot of times this is a result of if you're building a new subdivision and you're clearing land, you may pile all your land clearing debris in one corner of your subdivision, and it may stay there indefinitely. So what the proposed changes are in this text amendment is that we would eliminate this use except in an ML2 zoning district, which is the equivalent of an I2, manufacturing logistics 2, which is our most intense industrial type of zoning district. So going forward, if this text amendment passes, that is the only place you'd be able to do one of these in the future. And it would also add a requirement that you have a conditional zoning to do one of these. And I should mention that we don't see these very often. So this is not an everyday occurrence for us by any means. And then we would modify the prescribed conditions. And I know we're limited on time, so I won't go through all of these prescribed conditions, but you can see them on the screen. We've worked with our solid waste people in both the county and the city to come up with and work on these prescribed conditions. And so these have been reviewed thoroughly with our staff. So I believe that is my last slide. Oh, let me go back to that. I think you probably want to.
Yeah, if you could hold it on this slide right here for me 1 second.
Sure.
And Alan, the schedule as is now would be the April public hearing, May decision, correct?
That's right. Let me just jump to, I'm sorry, I thought I had the schedule slide, but I don't. Yes, a March 17th, not March 17th, I'm sorry, May 17th public hearing. April, thank you. Thank you. And a May 15th decision, correct? Thank you.
Okay.
Alan, would those then take effect with everything else on June 1st?
Yes, that was our goal, is to have these in place and effective when the rest of the UDO goes into effect on June 1st.
Are the UDO Advisory Committee, I think it's named now, are those meetings open to the public?
Go ahead.
Those meetings, they're really, as they're just a sort of feedback work group. They're intended to be just the committee, but we record all the meetings and we post them online on our YouTube site for anyone to watch.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Alan? Commissioner Wilson?
Alan, just definition of an accessory drive-through. Is that one that you there's those little windows on the side of buildings so you can walk up and get your prescriptions if you take dope, right? But is that a drive-through or not?
I think it is a drive-through, yes. If there's a vehicle lane associated with that, even though you might be able to walk up to that window, I think we would classify that as an accessory drive-through.
Okay, because I think we had a rezoning that there was some iffiness about that. And I think a large grocery chain had the walk-up one where you could get your prescriptions or something.
Okay.
And
if it was walk-up only, then I don't think it would be an accessory drive-through. But if it was a drive-through that you could also walk up to.
Okay.
But for example, I guess there's a donut shop in Noda that just has a walk-up window. We wouldn't consider that to be an accessory drive-through.
Okay, all right. As long as we get to clarity when it becomes the rule, then I'm copacetic.
Commissioner Blumenthal?
While we're on this topic, just again, this is a conversation for another time. I would argue a fast food restaurant is not an accessory drive-through, it's a drive-through establishment. Looking at the majority of where their business comes from and how that would then trickle down through the UDO going forward. On that note, though, as we look after June 1st, are current accessory drive-throughs in these areas going to be grandfathered in?
Yeah, the UDO is not going to go backwards and address existing drive-throughs.
But if that property were to be torn down, though, then they would lose that ability. And then we had a petition, I guess it was about a year ago, on Wendover, right? Where they had one accessory drive-through and they were rezoning to add additional. Would that just continue to be conditional rezonings going forward if they wanted to add drive-throughs?
If that were in a commercial district in a center, yes, they'd need a conditional rezoning to modify their existing drive-through.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Alan? Thank you so very much, Alan. Round of applause for Alan. Thank you so very much. If everyone can grant at least another 7 minutes or so of their time, I would greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to try to speed round this with the help of Commissioners Blumenthal and Wilden. So as you know, you guys received earlier last week the draft of the documents that the Environmental Sustainability Subcommittee has been working on for our work program. You guys received the checklist that ideally would be used by by the zoning committee as they are reviewing the rezoning petitions. You also received the updated environmental sustainability statement, which in its current form, I think is probably best suited to allow us to move forward with that work because it's pretty broad. And we didn't want to further narrow the focus of that document. So it's still good after 3 years of adoption. So thank you guys for taking the time to review that. And then also the one document is missing from your agenda, which Candace has that.
Madam Chair, it's in the PDF. It just wasn't printed.
Okay, it's in the PDF version of your agenda. But for the members of public, can we get that on the screen really quickly? While Candace is working on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the checklist. So Commissioner Wilden, do you remember the name that we settled on for the checklist? Blumenthal. So we've talked a lot about this checklist, and initially when we adopted the work program, and this is item number 4 of the work program, we said that there would be a checklist that would help us keep focus as we're reviewing rezoning petitions that can kind of say, hey, remember to check for these environmental issues, right? The checklist that the subcommittee presented, it encompasses so much more than just environmental issues. And I thought it worthy to keep all of those items in the checklist, even though they're not related to environmental issues. Things like displacement and park and open space and things of that nature. So because it is more expansive than environmental impacts, Commissioner Russell was prepared to make a motion to remove this item out of work program item number 4 and make the checklist its own work program number. Excuse me. That gives a little bit more meat to the breadth of this document. And I think that I would encourage it to be expanded a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, the emergency management public services portion that we should now add. So we already have a text amendment to what I hope will be adopted today. So I believe, Blumenthal, are you prepared to propose a new name for the document first? Because now that, although the subcommittee created the list, we want it to better reflect the intended use of the document. So the intended use of the document is for zoning committee members to kind of have this form to kind of evaluate each petition as you already do, but this is just makes it a little bit more uniform, and you may consider several things that are not currently on this checklist. But as we kind of add to this checklist, it's good to have, especially for new commissioners or new zoning committee members who are just kind of finding their way on that committee, because it can be quite intimidating. So I hope that you all have had a chance to review, and just looking for a name that better suits its intended use. and Blumenthal, if you could.
So quickly, the short answer is no, I don't have another name. My proposal would be to make a motion to separate this out and then to vote to adopt it in our April meeting, especially since the drafter of this had to leave early today. My second request would be for everyone, starting with Commissioner Rhodes, all the way around the rest of the dais, to provide any feedback in the next 2 weeks, right? If you have additional feedback on this, if you hadn't had a chance to read it, if you think of anything else, if we want to beef this up, by all means, that is all welcome, but we're not going to be able to do it in this setting, right? So you're going to have to take care of that offline. Third, I was reading through the minutes from our February meeting, and I want to make very clear that the target audience for this checklist is solely planning commissioners, right? In no way, shape, or form is this supposed to add responsibility to the planning staff, the zoning staff, and everything that they do. However, as is evidenced in the roles and responsibilities of the future environmental subcommittee that will be a part of this planning commission, we are going to work with planning staff to find ways as you guys start to retailer some of that rezoning process to better integrate some of this in. But starting on day one, when this is attached to the front of our packet every month, it is only for us, right? It's not like we're asking Dave or anybody else, the reviewers, to go through these things. It is a reminder to those of us sitting around this dais of what we should be factoring in as we look at each petition. On that note, if you're okay with that, Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to separate out this checklist and then bring it back in a month for final adoption, while we then move forward with the statement and roles and responsibilities today.
Okay, so what I think I just interpreted is that, excuse me, as this currently is part of work program item number 4, Commissioner Blumenthal just made a motion to take this checklist out of item number 4 and make it its own work program item, then creating an item number 7 in the work program. They will accept, the subcommittee will accept additional feedback over the next, I would say, 10 days, because I like that to really be a tighter window for you guys to be able to meet afterwards, et cetera. Seeing as though I already have a request for a change or update with the emergency management. Can we make that? Okay, good. So I think Commissioner Blumenthal made a motion. And do we have a second to that motion?
Wilden, second.
Wilden, second. And Wilden, Russell, and Blumenthal are those committee members that are working on these documents. And I'll give Commissioner Wilden to add anything should she feel need.
I would like to propose a name for the checklist.
I knew it.
Yes, you always come to me for these things. So the environment and sustainability rezoning considerations checklist.
Do we want to keep ES in the title since it is more broad?
No. Rezoning consideration checklist. Short, sweet, to the point, you know exactly what it is.
Commissioner Walton, we're still under discussion.
Supplemental checklist.
To what?
Supplemental rezoning checklist.
Supplemental rezoning checklist.
I'd like to propose that we figure this out in executive committee on Monday.
We can wordsmith this to death or not.
Motion on the floor is to take this out of the work program item number 4 and to adopt the name in executive committee on Monday, the 20th.
Correct.
That is the amended motion. That's the amended motion because it.
Correct. That is the amended motion.
Okay, and
seconded by Wilden.
Thank you so very much. Motion by Walton, second by Wilden. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Thank you. Just a few more notes, and I promise this is 30 seconds. For those of you
Need to make a motion to adopt. It'll take 10 seconds.
I would like to make a motion, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
I would like to make a motion to adopt the roles and responsibilities draft as final,
As well as
as well as
the statement.
the environmental statement that hasn't been updated in 3 years because it's so good in the first place.
Second, Blumenthal.
Motion by Wilden, second by Blumenthal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there any discussion? I'm sorry. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes, there's internal cheers happening. Okay, work's getting done, folks. And then finally, for those who were not aware, I got several messages from my fellow committee members, and I thank you so very much. But I presented to Board of County Commissioners it was zoning committee night. Mr. Gusman couldn't join. But normally it's the chair and the vice chair who provides an annual update to Board of County Commission. It was quite interesting, always fun. But they are highly interested in our work, as is evident by Commissioner Powell's presence here today. And just wanted to note that we should definitely attend more meetings for Board of County Commission, even if it's a subcommittee meeting. And then two, as my tenure on this board will end soon, just making sure that those lines of communication remain completely open and initiated primarily from this board to Board of County Commission. I just wanted to make that part of public record. That's number one. Number two, nominating committee will be announced in our April work session. The nominating committee, as you all know, and remember, are charged with finding the next two leaders of this board, and nominations will be taken by the nominating committee through Thursday, April 27th. Thursday, April 27th, the nominating committee will take nominations through that time. So those of you who are considering leading this body, please make note of that date, that deadline. And then the nominating committee will bring forth their chosen or preferred or recommended nominees for leadership roles. That will be the chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission in our May work session. So again, recommendations are made by the nominating committee in our May work session, and then the June work session is when the vote happens. So just making sure that you guys remain aware of that timeline. And then finally, I'm going to commit actually to finalizing dates of our community conversation hosting. And I think the name kind of stuck now, Community Conversations. There's more willing partnerships than I anticipated, which is a good thing. And now we're all trying to coordinate to see how we can kind of supplement the work and really make sure that it's our best collaborative effort. So thank you all for your patience, but we are targeting April for one, possibly two of those sessions, May 1 and then June 1. So that's kind of the forecast for right now. And by the end of this week, I am committed to finalizing dates amongst all the willing partners. So those are all my notes for today. And if no one else has anything for the good of the matter, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Yes.
Second.
We can stay another.
I was waiting.
You guys are quiet. We can stay. Did you have anything to add, Commissioner Powell?
I just want to thank every single person for their service, whether you're appointed by the city or the county. And I want everyone to remember that it is Charlotte and Mecklenburg Planning Commission, not just Charlotte. And so the partnership matters. And I'm really thankful that you came to do the presentation and that you guys are working, like thinking beyond just what has historically been thought of. Thank you.
Thank you for adding and sharing that, Commissioner Powell, and thank you for joining us today. You're welcome back anytime. And with that, I heard a unanimous approval